If there's one thing that every writer on earth struggles with, it's motivation. For the simple reason that writing a book is hard. That's why so few people do it. But we found that there are a couple of small ideas that can really make a big difference as you're writing your book and help you to keep motivated. The first is celebrating small successes along the way. The second is silencing self-doubt. And the third is a few quick tips we have for how to stay motivated during the novel writing process. Let's get started. So when we look at motivation for writing a novel, I find that what really works for me is celebrating small successes. If you think about it, a novel is very much a delayed gratification situation. There's very little instant gratification as you're going along, and it can often take 6 months to a year to get a first draft written. So it's important to celebrate small successes along the way, between the beginning and the end. Those are trophies, not wine glasses, in case you were wondering. So the rewards can be your choice. A glass of wine, a few blocks of chocolates, they can be great, but you kind of want to balance indulgent rewards with ones that are just enjoyable. So maybe every couple of days you want to give yourself a glass of wine and a couple of squares of chocolate, not necessarily every hour. And you can balance them with things like buying yourself a book you've really been wanting to read if you hit a major milestone, or if it's just a daily kind of reward, it can be things like going for a walk or having a cup of tea and daydreaming or a long soak in the bathtub, that kind of thing. It is a good idea to plan some of these milestones in advance though, the milestones and the reward. So you might choose where you want to get to and then have a reward to lure you to get there. So some examples could be finishing your novel blueprint, finishing part 1 of your book, hitting 10,000 words, every 10,000 words. Ideally, you want to space your rewards about 1 to 2 weeks apart. You don't want them so far apart that you feel like you have to wait ages, but you also don't want to be getting a reward every day or the allure wears off a little. The other thing that's important to remember is that some days are tough. Some days you'll sit down and not feel like writing. It'll be hard, and persevering even for 10 or 15 minutes will feel like a challenge. Most days I'm hoping that once you sit down, the momentum will kind of keep you going, but some days are difficult, and on those days it's important to reward yourself. You don't want to feel like Sisyphus, just pushing that boulder up a hill and having it roll down again all the time. Then the final thing I want to say about celebrating small successes is that the progress itself should be its reward in some small way. Because the progress is the joy, the actual writing of the novel is the joy. This is really a situation in which the journey as well as the destination are what makes it so special. Writing is as much about the journey, as much about sitting down and putting words on the page each day, as it is about ending the book and having something concrete in your hands. So those are a couple of things to bear in mind when you're looking for motivation. Self-doubt plagues all of us at one time or another, and writers are particularly prone to wondering if their efforts are worthwhile and if anyone will ever read them. So here are 5 ways to silence self-doubt if you're noticing that it's becoming a problem for you. My first suggestion is to read Anne Lamott, who, as I'm sure you know by now, wrote my all-time favourite book on writing, Bird by Bird. She suggests taking the tiny gremlin of self-doubt and putting him in a glass jar with a lid so that they can continue to shout at you and tell you how dreadful you are, but you can't hear him anymore. I like that idea a lot. The second suggestion is to take your thoughts to their ridiculous extremes. What's the absolute worst that could happen? Your writing is so dreadful that someone will arrest you and never let you put pen to paper again. It's a little unlikely, isn't it? But it can be helpful to know that your fears are largely irrational. The third suggestion is to celebrate your accomplishments. So think about the times when your work has been praised, when anything you've written has been published. Think about what you've achieved so far and some of the good things that people have said about your writing. And write these down, put them above your writing desk. Keep them obvious and in front of you so that when self-doubt plagues you, you can look at the positive things that you've already been able to achieve. The fourth is to not compare yourself to others. This is such a difficult one with writing, but it's so important. There will always be writers behind and ahead of you on the writing journey, but none of them have that unique combination of thoughts and experiences and words and voice that you have, and that's really important to remember. And the last one is to keep writing. Even though it seems like this is contraindicated, the way that you're feeling, if you're feeling plagued by self-doubt, the best way to get through it is to just keep slugging on, word after word after word after word. The problem is that a lot of the time self-doubt shows up as an internal editor. and this internal editor kind of freezes everything that you write. So you write a sentence and this internal editor says, oh, that's rubbish, you really shouldn't bother. And the problem is that if you listen to that, you'll become too frozen to be able to write anything and get yourself stuck in a giant case of writer's block. And finally, the thing that a lot of writers say to me is that they don't know if they're cut out to be a writer. They don't know if they can actually do this. But let me tell you once and for all that if you are actually writing, then you are a writer. That's all it takes. You're cut out to be a writer if you're sitting down and writing a little bit every day or every week. I know that you can do it. Just keep going. A lot of the time, writing can feel like exercise. Once you started doing it, you feel great. After you've done it, you feel great. But getting started can be quite difficult. So here are 3 quick tips on how to stay motivated and how to get you to pick up your writing every day, if possible, or at least 3 or 4 times a week. The first is to limit your time. It's a funny thing, but a lot of people who give up their day jobs to become writers find that they're actually less productive when they have a whole yawning day ahead of them. So what I suggest is finding a chunk of time that you know you can write in. It only has to be an hour, it actually only has to be 45 minutes. And it's much easier to be productive within that short chunk of time because you know that there's no time to waste at all. You can't go whittling away your time looking things up online, you can't do research in that time, you can only sit down and write. The other helpful thing is to set a timer, say for 15 or 20 minutes, and say that you're going to write non-stop for that whole 20 minutes. And then a lot of the time, by the time you hit the 20-minute mark, you'll be interested, and so you'll keep going. And it'll be fairly easy to keep going. The second is to plan your time. Make notes about your plans for the next session of writing. And some writers go so far as to stop in the middle of a sentence or stop in the middle of a paragraph or a scene, but all you really need to do is make a note about what you want to do in the next session. And that's really helpful because otherwise if you sit down and you don't know where to start, it's kind of a good excuse to procrastinate or to waste time and not to get down to the actual writing. And finally, reward your time, which we've just been talking about. And one of the things I like to do is reward my time with something I'm tempted to use as procrastination, in small bites, not in large chunks, and only after you've done your writing. So that might be watching an episode of TV or calling a friend of yours or finishing a chapter of your book, but you wait to do that until after you've done the hard work. The key with all of these motivation tips is that we need you to be picking up your writing all the time because that's the only way this book's going to get written. Word by word, sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter, by you. That's the goal.